Mielos ponios ir mėly ponai, iš tiesų mūsų diskusijos tema, ko mus išmokė nueitas reformų kelias, yra jau savaime diskutuotina. Man vis dažniau atrodo, kad žmogus ne tik iš kitų nieko nesimoko, bet dažnai nesimoko ir iš savo paties patirties, savo klaidų, savo bėdų. Prieš pristatant mūsų garbingus diskutantus, kažkaip prisiminiau vieną Merfio dėsnį, kuris vadinasi atviraširdiškumo taisyklė. Jis skelbia maždaug taip, kad žmonės, kurie išvengia permainų, nesugeba išvengti blogų permainų. Jeigu perfrazuotume ir pritaikytume valstybėms, tai turėtų būti taip, kad valstybės, kurios išvengia reformų, neišvengia blogos ekonomikos, gal net jo žlugimo, o kartais net ir valstybės žlugimo. Tai mūsų diskusijoje dalyvaus labai garbinga kompanija, neprisimenu, kada tokioje esu buvęs, 3 valstybių buvę finansų ministrai, vienas iš jų privatizavimo ministras, tai Slovakijos parlamento narys, buvęs vicepremjeras ir finansų ministras Ivan Mikloš. Taip pat Pasaulio banko atstovas, buvęs Bulgarijos vicepremjeras ir finansų ministras, tvarkė šalies finansus finansinės krizės metais, 9-13, Simeon Djankov, beje, iš šeimos turinčios labai gilias politikų tradicijas, jo protėviai dalyvavo Bulgarijos valdyme dar 19 amžiuje. Ir daktaras Lajos Bokros, atstovaujantis modernios Vengrijos judėjimą, buvęs finansų ministras, rašęs disertaciją, jeigu neklystų, iš Centrinės Amerikos industrializacijos, integracijos ir judėjimo į bendrą rinką. Norėčiau, kad kiekvienas iš mūsų kalbėtojų atsakytų į tokius klausimus. Ar reformos buvo pakankamai fundamentalios, radikalios? Kaip jie vertina tuos politikus, tuos žmonės, kurie visą laiką sakydavo, kad su reformomis reikia palaukti, jas vykdyti lėčiau? Kokius sprendimus savo priimtus jie laiko teisingais, kokius nelabai? Kaip įmanoma išsaugoti reformų laimėjimus, reformų pradžią, kai keičiasi vyriausybė, kiekvienam iš jų teko tai patirti. Ir kviečiu pirmąjį kalbėti Ivan Mikloš, Slovakijos parlamento narį, buvusį finansų ministrą. Jo pasisakymai, kaip ir kitiem, 10 minučių ir po pasisakymo kviečiu prisijungti čia prie mūsų stalo. Prašom, Ivan Mikloš.
Good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me to this conference. Firstly, I would like to congratulate Lithuanian Free Market Institute for 25 years of very successful operation. Lithuanian Free Market Institute is very well known, not only in Lithuania, but broadly in all Central Eastern European region, but I mean also in broader sense. Let me say a few remarks about last 25 years of experience from economic transition, from reforms in the, especially, but not only, in the post-communist countries. Firstly, we have a lot of experiences after 25 years. At the beginning, reforms, post-communist transition reforms were more technical than political problem. It was no practical experience from any country. And from political point of view, at that time, it was time of so-called extraordinary politics, like how Leszek Balcerowicz called it, when it was general will and effort to have change, to do reforms. From technical point of view, it was much more complicated, of course, because it was no experience. In this regard, Poland and Polish reformer Leszek Balcerowicz was the first and really pioneer who started this process in Hungary from January 1st, 1990, and then followed by Václav Klaus in Czechoslovakia in 1991. Approaches were different. These two persons were the most well-known protagonists of so-called radical Big Bang reforms. In other countries like Hungary, but also Bulgaria, Romania, was used more slower and gradualistic approach. Now we can say that this more radical and complex approach was much more successful and brought better results. What is maybe the most important experience from the economic reforms and economic transition is that radical and complex reform approach based on the strengthening economic freedom brought much better results than any other approaches or possible solutions. I think there are strong data, empirical data, which are showing this. If we look, for instance, which countries are the most successful in convergence, and I think convergence, economic convergence, which means approaching how quickly countries are approaching Western European economic level by GDP per capita, in PPP, there are 5 most successful countries. All 3 Baltic countries, Poland and Slovakia. If we compare, for instance, development between 2000 and 2013, the average convergence growth, convergence progress in these 5 countries was 21.4%, and in every one from these 5 countries it was more than 20%. They converged by more than 20% during that period of 12-13 years. On the other side, in Hungary it was only 7%, in Slovenia it was only 3%, which means you can see really different results in these different approaches. The main difference is that in these 5, the most successful countries, economic policy was based on the reforms which strengthened economic freedom, which diminished the role of state in economy, which were based on the macroeconomic stabilization, fiscal consolidation, but also deep structural reforms, improving business environment, attracting foreign investment, and so on and so on. Another point is that there are countries which are showing that it is possible also for latecomers to do significant progress. And I think this example is my country, Slovakia. Slovakia was, at the end of 90s, lagging behind. Was isolated politically, was isolated economically. Economic development was very poor. There were almost no foreign direct investment. There was huge corruption. Country was excluded from the EU and OECD and NATO enlargement process. Slovakia, when Slovakia started after division of Czechoslovakia, our GDP per capita was less than 2/3 of the Czech GDP per capita. The level was 64% of the Czech GDP per capita. Today, Slovakia has the same GDP per capita as Czech Republic. And the main reason of this success and really convergence jump were deep and comprehensive economic reforms based on strengthening economic freedom. And these reforms were done between 1998 and 2006, and especially between 2002 and 2006, during 2 Dzurinda's governments, mainly during 2nd Dzurinda's government. To illustrate this progress and this possible progress also in other countries, let me say that majority of the structural reforms, very broad package of reforms, we prepared during 2003 year, and we implemented this package of reforms from January 1st, 2004. There were public finance reform, tax reform, fiscal decentralization, pension reform, social system reform, labor market reform, and healthcare reform. All these reforms were prepared in 2003 and started in 2004. Then Slovakia achieved really convergence jump. In 4 years, between 2004 and 2008, our convergence progress was 14%, while in Poland it was 7%, Czech Republic 5%, and Hungary 3%. During only 4 years, it was the main contribution why Slovakia was able to catch up a Czech economic level in GDP per capita during last around 17 years. Another point is that it works. I mean, it works. This is good news for other countries, even other latecomer countries, that if reforms are done really comprehensively, complexly, and radically enough, then it is possible to expect relatively quick results. Another good example of this are Baltic countries during and after crisis in 2008, 2009. And I think this lesson is and could be important not only for former communist countries, from transition countries, but even for countries in southern and western Europe, including very well-known case of the Greece. Let me mention finally 2 final points. The next one is if reforms are sustainable and if there is necessary or possible to have general consensus on reforms. Of course, if it is possible to have general consensus, long-term consensus of the necessity of the economic policy based on economic freedom, this is great. And there are countries in which more or less it happened, like Ireland, like New Zealand, but also I think like Baltic countries. But even if there is no this consensus, or saying by another words, very important is that if anybody will wait for consensus or try to gain consensus before doing reforms, it is simply impossible. It is necessary, in my opinion, use any possibility, any opportunity, any window of opportunity to do reforms as much as possible. If it is possible to build also national consensus, this is great, but it is not inevitable, and sometimes it is simply impossible. And the last point is to answer a question if there are some reasons or circumstances in which reforms have to be or could to be slower or less radical or softer. I don't see any this kind of reason. Even in today's Ukraine, at present I serve as also as advisor to Ukrainian finance minister, Ukrainian economy minister. And usually people ask, what about war? What about situation in Ukraine when they have war? Isn't it reason for slowing down or kind of softening reforms? And my answer is simple, no, on the contrary. On the contrary, if situation is difficult, if there is war like in Ukraine, it is only additional reason for doing reforms more complexly, more deeply, and it is only reason for speeding up and deepening reforms. Because only reforms can improve economic situation and increase power, including military power, of the country, and also only successful economy can attract for the citizens to being part of the country. Also for the citizens which are living, for instance, in Crimea, to attract them potential change in today's situation. So let me conclude that I think that despite of very clear and very strong evidences about effect of the reforms based on these principles, it will be not easy. As we can see all over the world, especially in Europe, the populism is growing, and populism is the most dangerous power against necessary changes and against necessary reforms. Which means this kind of effort, this kind of mission, like Lithuanian Institute for Free Market Economy has, will be not less important in the next years and the next decades, but even more important than it was until now. Thank you.
Ačiū Ivan Mikloš. Kviečiu pasisakyti buvusį Bulgarijos finansų ministrą, dirbantį Pasaulio banke, Simeon Djankov. Prašom.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Some of us have been at many such events over past years discussing what reforms need to be done in a particular country or across the whole East European region. Who will actually have the courage to do such reforms? And also, there has been a very lively discussion over the past quarter century of what is the sequence of reforms, so which reform should be done first, which second, what is the right order of reforms. And one of the benefits of having 25 years behind us, both for the Institute, which we are celebrating today, but also for all of us who have been involved in some way in the reform processes, that there are some things that we now can say we know for sure, and perhaps we thought we knew then, but now we have the evidence. But also there are some surprises, some things that perhaps we didn't know then, that with the benefit of time, we know now. So I'll mostly focus my first comments on those types of new learning, of new knowledge. And I'll mention in particular three things that I can say we know now that were at least uncertain, or not even in our frame of point of view before. The first thing addresses this issue that really dominated the discussion of reforms or economic transformation more generally in the early years of transition. And they dominated it both politically in our region as well as academically. Many academics around the world, some involved in the transition process, some not involved at all, but somehow wanted to share their opinions, had this view and a very lively discussion of the speed of reform. So, and to some extent the sequencing of reform, should we go fast so that all the changes that needed to be done can be done almost at once, and then we can have a period of benefiting from such reforms. Or, as some especially academics feared, this may create a political backlash against the reformers, and therefore you need to very much go step by step, build some sort of supporting institutions, and only then do the type of reforms that that you would like to do. And as the previous speaker mentioned, there were some countries that just went forward, Poland and the Czechoslovakia then specifically. Other countries wavered, waited a bit, and still other countries, for political or other reasons, waited more than a decade, in some cases even longer. Well, with the benefit of this past 25 years, I would say that we have sufficient evidence now to say that whenever you have a chance to do reforms, you should do them immediately. You should not somehow wait for better political setup. You should not wait for technical advisors from the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund or whoever else. You should do it relatively quickly. And if there are some fixes that need to be done later, some betterment of what you've done, there is time to do that. And I think the best examples of why the gradual approach does not work are actually the countries that, in waiting for better times, actually never got to reform. One such country was mentioned, Ukraine. While we focus a lot on more recent events in Ukraine and attempts to improve after these, there is one fact among us, at least economists, to note that actually Ukraine is one of the few countries that never tried to reform. So it was never the right moment. So year after year were lost, 20-some years were lost in basically never even trying. There are a few other such countries like Moldova, for example, in Eastern Europe. And as a result of that, 25 years after transition has started in the region, these countries have no reforms. A lot of their population is trying to leave, and their purchasing power per capita, so basically their wealth per person, their income, is actually lower than it was 25 years ago. There are incidentally only 4 such countries in our region: Ukraine, Moldova, Tajikistan, and Armenia, where people, the average person today is actually poorer than the average person 25 years ago. Well, to me, that's enough evidence to answer the question of should you wait for a better political moment to reform. If you wait, you just lose time, but also politics actually turn against you, as we've seen in these countries. And in some sense, it may become too late to do anything. It would be very curious, I think, in the questions to former Deputy Prime Minister Mikloš. We can perhaps ask about his views on Ukraine. My views on Ukraine are that they have waited for so long that in some areas they would never catch up with the rest of Eastern Europe. But that's my first point, that always try to do things quickly, and when you can, don't wait for a better period. The second point, many people, including myself until very recently, thought that economic transformation and big reforms in particular are sort of a continuous forward-going process, that sometimes you may end up with a political situation where you cannot continue the reforms, but at least you always go forward. And only in the last 3-4 years, I think that view has changed, or at least my view has changed, and we have seen in a variety of countries, in some cases more, in some cases less, reversals of reforms, significant reversals of previous reforms. I think the next speaker is better prepared and in a better position to talk about reversals of reforms in his native country, Hungary. But let me point out that it's not just Hungary in the last few years that has made significant steps back and negated reforms that were previously done and were successful for a period of time. It's perhaps the most egregious case. But to a large extent that has happened in Russia. I should just mention some cases like privatization, where about 20 years ago in '95, private ownership in Russia was larger than it is now, partly through renationalization, taking over of private companies by the government over the last 10-12 years of President Putin's rule. The private sector in Russia is now actually smaller, statistically smaller, than it was 20 years ago at the start of transition in Russia. And in some sectors, there is realistically no private ownership whatsoever. But in some areas like pension reform, or in general the pension system, a number of other countries have also stepped back. For example, in creating and maintaining second pillars, the private pillar of the pension system. Among these countries is Slovakia. Hungary, of course, leads in doing nefarious things in Eastern Europe, but a variety of other countries have. Poland actually last year also negated to a large extent part of its pension reforms. The socialists in my country, Bulgaria, tried, so far not successfully, but they're continuing to try. My point is that not just with particular political leaders, as in Hungary and Russia, but there may be a general wave of reversals across particular sectoral reforms, or in general across reforms, and we need to be very careful about that. Reform is not just upward-going process. And my third and final point is about how we viewed reforms maybe 25 years ago when this institute was established, and some similar institutes across Eastern Europe, we thought that perhaps because of the link between democratization, moving away from totalitarian political regimes and central planning towards democracy and free economy, the types of reforms that we have tried to do in various countries in the region, to a large extent, were very region-specific. So specific to Eastern Europe because of this heritage of communism, of central planned economies. We learn now, especially in the last few years, that many of the reforms that we have tried to do are also reforms very needed in other parts of the world. Southern Europe in particular, we see after the Eurozone crisis, largely unsuccessful in my view, attempts at reforms in Greece, Spain, Portugal, somewhat more successful in Italy, not very successful in my mind either, somewhat more successful in Ireland. But in many of the larger reforms, pension reform, labor reform, administrative reform, tax reform, the same issues that we had in our region, and we thought that this is a vestige of the communist past, actually is a vestige of the absence of rule of law, both in its written sense, having good rules, but also in its implementation. During the Eurozone crisis, I was finance minister in Bulgaria, Greece being our neighbor. We spent almost as much time looking at the Greek economy and reforms at our own. And I noticed significant similarities. Greece had rules, but there was a total subversion of the rule of law. So basically nobody followed, including the government didn't follow its own rules in tax collection, in pension reform, in how to run the public administration. So in some sense it was very similar to Bulgaria. And it continues to be similar in the deficiencies in how one runs a government. The first speaker talked about what is the meaning of government and why do we need governments. Well, in our old regimes, governments operated in a very repressive and ineffective ways, but there are a lot of other governments around Europe, including Southern Europe in particular, where today governments run in a deeply inefficient way, away from the liberal principles of what governments are about. Let me finish with the thought that it's not even just in Europe. If you go further afield and think of which other regions in the world can benefit a lot from the type of reforms that your institute has promoted, that we all in some sense have promoted, there are still large regions in the world, for example the Middle East, where the type of liberal economic thinking, the type of rule of law that we would like to see in all countries around the world in terms of freedom of economic development still does not exist, not even in its nascency. And in this type of regions like the Middle East, it may take a lot longer to do that, but we, from our region, having this painful experience over the last 2.5 decades, are in a very good situation to be able to benefit the reformers, the private sector, the academics from these other regions, and tell them about our experience. So I hope that we can all do this together, not for our own countries, but for the benefit of other countries as well. Thank you.
Dėkoju Simeon Djankov už Bulgarijos reformų prisiminimą ir nušvietimą. Dabar kviečiu daktarą Lajos Bokros iš Vengrijos, kuri mūsų, bent jau mūsų akimis žiūrint, 90 metais buvo gerokai toliau pažengusi nei Lietuva, kaip Vengrijoje sekėsi pereiti prie rinkos ekonomikos. Prašom, Lajos Bokros.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In many hotels around the world, including this one, there is a sign in the bathroom reminding people of their responsibility to protect the environment. Put your towels on the racks if you want to reuse them. I am a very, very conscious person of climate change and trying to protect the environment, so I always try to heed this advice. Last week I was in Barcelona in a hotel where I kept putting back my towels on the racks, and somehow the cleaning lady was always taking it away and put a new one. One day I asked her, "What is this?" This is a policy of the hotel. She was not aware of that. She did not know about it. And when I tried to explain in plain Spanish that it was important to protect the environment, she said, "Okay," took away the new, fresh, clean towels and threw it into the dirty ones and put me back the old, used ones. Lesson: it's not only to get good rules, it is important to implement them. There are people around you who don't know and who don't care. I also had the privilege to advise, fortunately not directly the Greek government, but some of those people who advised the Greek government, including EU, IMF, and other people in Athens in April and May. And my strong impression was that some people, even in the Greek government, did not know and did not care. Now Finland is in a kind of a recessionary situation right now. And what we heard from the Prime Minister last week is that we have to implement structural reforms to make the economy more competitive after the decline of Nokia, after the decline of pulp and paper. And he also said that we have to maintain fiscal discipline at any cost, and started implementing measures on himself. Getting rid of holidays, getting rid of bonuses, tightening a little bit the belt, the bloody austerity, which is so hard for some other people to understand. Of course, austerity is not something which will create growth in itself. But without fiscal equilibrium, without fiscal discipline, there is no growth possible. So it is a necessary, although far from sufficient, condition for sustainable economic growth. Why do I say this? Because today, as my distinguished friends have already alluded to, structural reforms are no longer a transitional issue. It's a task for the whole European Union, and if I wandered around the globe in many other countries, including China recently, we haven't mentioned China, which has become so big that it affects all other countries around the globe, even if the problem in China is not stagnation as yet, but only just the slowdown of this very extremely rapid growth which it experienced in the last 1 year or so. So it's absolutely important for us to be cognizant of the fact that reforms are forever. Reforms are always on the agenda if we want to maintain competitiveness. And competitiveness is, of course, one of the most important conditions for the continuation of sustainable, that is to say, fiscally and externally sustainable economic growth. Why is this important? This is important because, as my friend Simeon said, it's not only good to catch immediately the opportunity to implement, Ivan said that too, structural reforms when the opportunity arises, but also because Structural reforms are, unfortunately, reversible. And Simeon gave me the task to talk about my own country, Hungary, which was by and large very, very successful, even if it did not have shock therapy in the first decade of transition, before 2000. But if we analyze the situation of Hungary today, we can easily say that the last important structural reform happened as early as 1998. 17 years have passed without any further reform. Moreover, consecutive governments were agreeing not only on not implementing any new reforms, but some of them reversed those reforms which made the country quite successful in the first decade of transition. Nationalization has already been mentioned. It is now very, very fashionable among self-styled national conservative governments. They call themselves national conservatives. And they don't like the market economy. They don't like freedom. They don't like private property. They like not only national property, but they like state property. In Hungary, in the last 5 years, close to 50 companies have been nationalized. And it's important to mention that not only just unimportant small and medium-sized companies, which were interesting for some cronies of certain not-so-successful entrepreneurs, but whole sectors. Banking, public utilities. One of these two important strategic sectors, which really create a good or a bad environment for the whole economy, deliberately destroying an environment which made rules more or less equitable to everybody. One way to do that was to distort the tax system. Punitive taxes were levied on many foreign banks in Hungary in order to chase them out of the country. Social security, pension reform reversal was already mentioned. Hungary was one of the first to start the so-called multi-pillar pension system as early as in 1998. And it had a history of more than 15 years and accumulated more than 12% of GDP worth of assets, private money, belonging directly to citizens. That was confiscated by the government in name of two things. They said they would reduce the very high level of public debt, which did not happen, and they will protect, quote unquote, the social security pension system, which is impossible if you have a single pillar, monopolistic, pay-as-you-go type of system in a country which has an aging population and a shrinking population. And we all know that the pay-as-you-go pension system, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, is suffering from a structural deficiency, which is free ridership. People demand higher and higher pensions, while at the same time want to pay lower and lower contributions. Why? Because there is no link between benefit and contribution at the level of the individual. So it shows something deeper. It shows the lack of solidarity. You may say that in Germany, in Sweden, in other countries, the pay-as-you-go system is functioning well, although even in those countries where you have demographic decline, people think about, on the margin, some structural reforms regarding the pension system. But in countries where you have not only the demographic decline, but also this very, very tough and tragic legacy of having no solidarity among the people, complete atomization of society, reforms are even more important, would have been more important to maintain, to maintain the momentum for that. Of course, there are many, many other instances where reforms were reversed in Hungary. Without having the time to analyze them, just to mention a few: building new monopolies, destroying the rule of law, reform in education, reversed completely. Now everything belongs to the state, in name of what our Prime Minister used to say, illiberal democracy. So I'm very happy to be here in a conference organized by a liberal institute, because in my country, even the word liberal has become a curse for official people. Let me conclude by saying that English is probably one of the few languages where we make a distinction between politics and policy. In most other languages, it's difficult to understand the distinction. I teach at Central European University in Budapest, which is a small American private university sponsored by George Soros. I don't know until when the university will stay there, because there are rumors that it's kind of a not very welcome institution in a darkening political situation. But I always start my public policy lectures to highlight this distinction between politics and policy. We all understand why reforms are important, and they belong to policy. But sometimes we forget about that every good policy needs good politics as well. We need to build and maintain consensus, not only just to implement those reforms, but also to defend them and push ahead. And for that, we need even something broader, what I would call culture. Lithuania and the other two Baltic states are very, very fortunate that they belong to a Nordic cultural sphere, which builds on a good, solid, entrenched tradition of fiscal discipline, competitiveness, and openness, so that people don't feel globalization as a threat. Some of them may be, but many people understand also that globalization is an opportunity. In other countries, including Greece at this point in time, most people feel about globalization as a threat exclusively. And as a consequence, they try to implement policies which destroy the competitiveness of the country. It's not about the debt. Don't believe for a second what was written by Yanis Varoufakis yesterday in the International New York Times. They did not have any policy how to tackle the competitiveness part. It's not about austerity. It's not about repaying the debt. It doesn't matter at this point in time how large the Greek debt is, because they don't pay interest. They don't pay any repayment. It is not asked from them. So it's a very nice big number in the sky, but the pie is in the sky at the same time as well. So what we need, not only good policy, but also good politics and a receptive culture which can be had and can be given and can be generated and fostered only by an open society where you have the rule of law. Thank you so much.
Dėkoju Lajos Bokros už labai įdomų ir gražiai emocingą pasisakymą. Ir dabar norėčiau pakviesti prisijungti prie mūsų buvusi Lietuvos ministrą pirmininką Aleksandrą Abišalą, kuris vadovavo Lietuvos vyriausybei turbūt pačiu sunkiausiu jos ekonomikai metu 1992 metų Liepos, spalio mėnesiais ir norėčiau paklausti jo, kokios reformos buvo svarbiausios Lietuvai ir ko jos mus išmokė ir apskritai kokios reformos buvo nebaigtos ir kuo tai baigėsi Lietuvai su nebaigtom reformom. Prašom, Aleksandrai, žodis jums.
Tai man patinka tokia pozityvi diskriminacija, kai savų nekviečia kalbėti iš tribūnas, bet Rimvydai, jeigu leisite, vis tiek noriu šitą pasakyti ne į temą. Gavęs kvietimą į šitą renginį, ilgai galvojau, ar reikia sveikinti Laisvos rinkos institutą, ar apgailestauti. Nes 90 metais, kai institutas buvo steigiamas, tikrai nesitikėjau sulaukti 25 metų jubiliejaus. Ne dėl to, kad pats ruošiausi numirti, bet dėl to, kad nemaniau, kad Lietuvai reikės 25 metų, kad po 25 metų Lietuvai reikės Laisvos rinkos instituto, kuris propaguotų, gintų, skatintų laisvos rinkos idėjas. Manau, Rimvydas paliudys, mūsų daugelis buvo gerokai naivesni ir galvojom, kad daugiausiai po kokių 10 metų būsim tokia pat laisva ir laisvos rinkos valstybė, kaip ir valstybės aplinkui. Ir begalvodamas nusprendžiau, kad visai nereikia man rinktis. Aš sveikinu Laisvos rinkos institutą, kad jis gyvas, kad jis dirba, kad jis labai daug daro, kad jis yra vertinamas Lietuvoje ir ne tik Lietuvoje. Ir apgailestauti, kad mes visi kartu nepadarėm, kad jo jau nebereikėtų. Ir turiu prašymą, kai Laisvos rinkos institutas ves 50 metų jubiliejų, prašau manęs nekviesti, nes tą, ką Čarlis sakė apie prisidėjimą, kontribuciją, aš manysiu, kad tai yra įrodymas, kad aš nepadariau to, ko reikia, kad net ir po 50 metų Lietuvoje vis dar reikia ginti laisvos rinkos idėjas. O dabar šnekėkime apie reformas. Iš tikrųjų, 90-93 metai, nes aš juos apibrėžiu kaip tų pirmųjų reformų, jeigu taip norit vadinti laiką, iki lito įvedimo ir valiutų valdybos įvedimo, kur Laisvos rinkos instituto žmonės buvo turbūt pagrindiniai garvežiai šitos idėjos. Bet buvo sunkių, bet buvo ir labai juokingų dalykų. Vienas toks juokingas dalykas buvo kokiais turbūt 91, gal 2. Paskaičiau tokį pranešimą, nedidelį, neatsimenu kur, kad Prancūzijos valdžia vykdo labai didelę reformą. Jie didina gyventojų pajamų mokestį 1,5% ir mažina kapitalo mokestį 2%. Buvo žiauriai juokinga, prie ko čia reforma, šitokie smulkus, mažyčiai pakeitimai. Ir paskui jau gerokai vėliau dabar supratau, kad ten iš tikrųjų buvo reformos, o tą, ką mes darėm, reformom nebuvo iki 23 metų. Tai buvo griovimas seno, jeigu tokio daikto buvo tam sektoriui, ir statymas visiškai naujo, tai nėra reformos, tai yra kūryba. Kūryba turint galvoj, kad laiko mes turime mažai, kad sąlygos aplinkui ir išoriai tikrai nėra paprastos ir geriau pastatyti ką nors, kad ir kreivoko, bet kad vis tiek būtų. Su pavydu žiūrėdami į Vengriją, į Lenkiją, į Čekoslovakiją, kur daugelis valstybės institucijų ir kažkokios sistemos buvo ir jas iš tikrųjų reikėjo reformuoti, pritaikyti kitokiam gyvenimo būdui, bet nebūtinai statyti iš naujo. Todėl aš šiaip jau ne tik 90-23 metais, bet ir vėliau Lietuvoje mūsų pačių yra per mažai vertinama. Iš tikrųjų, pasižiūrėkime į Moldovą, Tadžikistaną, į tą pačią Ukrainą, Graikiją, Vengriją ir pamatysim, kad mes tikrai neblogai čia susitvarkėm, net neturėdami tokių architektų kaip Lešekas Balcerovičius, o turėdami jaunus, įžulius, nevelnio neišmanančius, daug prisiskaičiusius, bet vis dėlto norinčius daryti žmonės. Tai aš manau atsakiau į tą pirmą klausimą, Rimvydai, nes nėra šnekėti apie tai, kokios reformos buvo reikalingos, kokios ne, nes reformų nebuvo, mano įsivaizdavimu, bet norėčiau atsakyti paskutinį klausimą. Ką, manau, reikėtų daryti politikams, ketinančiams priimti nepopuliarų, bet reikalingą sprendimą. Daug reikėtų, bet vienas dalykas, ko būtinai reikėtų, tai yra pasimokyti pokyčių valdymą. Kadangi jau 23 metai esu vadybos konsultantas, tai moku visokių tokių terminų, nes reformos yra pokyčiai. Tai vienas dalykas, ką žudbūt reikia išmokti, tai Pareto aksiomos vedinį, kuris sako, padarė 80% reformos, pradėk naują, nes, kaip žinia, 20% pastangų duoda 80% rezultato. Neverta dar 80% pastangų dėti dėl likusių 20% pasiekimo. O antras pokyčių valdymo dėsnis yra taip pat labai paprastas. Norint padaryti gerą pokytį arba gerą reformą, reikia dviejų sąlygų. Reikia politinės valios ir reikia krizės. Krizių mes esam turėję puikių, politinės valios pritrūkdavo beveik visada daryti reformams. Tai aš manau, kad vien dėl to, kad žmonės nėra mokėsi šito dėsnio, ne dėl piktos valios. Galų gale, jeigu krizės ir nėra, tai norint padaryti gerą pokytį, jie nesunkiai galima sukurti. Ačiū.
Dėkui Aleksandrui. Apskritai, man visada norisi reformas lyginti su, tarkim, širdies šuntavimo operacija. Turbūt nėra pasaulyje žmogaus, kuris chirurgo būtų prašęs, mielas daktarė, ar galėtumėt jūs man operaciją daryti kuo lėčiau, tarkim, ne 8 valandas, o kad truktų dieną, 2 savaitę, kad netaip skaudėtų. Bet kai tik prieinam prie reformų, mes visą laiką kalbam, kad čia negalima, čia žmonės nesupras, nepripras ir taip toliau. Aleksandras užsiminė apie 2 faktorius – politinę valią ir krizę. Ir kadangi mes lietuviai nuolat su pavydu žiūrėjom į kitus reformuojamus kraštus, pirmiausia Estiją ir netgi Slovakiją, kuri vienu metu staiga matom, kad turi mažiausius mokesčius ir greičiau už mus eurą įsivedė, tai norėčiau paklausti Ivan Mikloš, kaip Slovakijai sekėsi su politinė valia, nes rezultatai, bent iš mano taško žiūrint, yra nuostabus. 90 metais Slovakija gamino rusiškus tankus ir ne vieno automobilio. Šiandien Slovakija gamina daugiausia automobilių vienai sielai pasaulyje. Ir per 4 metus Slovakijos bendras vidaus produktas 4-8 metais po įstojimo į Europos Sąjungą augo 16%. Kaip buvo su politinė valia Slovakijoje? Ar daug reformų liko neįvykdyta dėl to, kad politikai išsigando, tarkim, žmonių spaudimo?
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, I have to say that, as Mr. Prime Minister said, crisis usually is good incentive for doing reforms, but there are exemptions. Slovakia is exemptions in this point of view. The main reforms which really speeding up the economic development were prepared, as I said, in 2003 and implemented from 2004. At that time, there was no crisis. The reason why it was possible to do it was that at the end of 2002, second Zurinda's government came to power. We continued. We started in 1998, but it was a very broad coalition. It was 9 parties from former communists to everybody was there. It was very difficult to do really radical reforms, but we stabilized the economy. We solved this lagging behind our neighbors. But then in 2002, and this was the most important, it was created window of opportunity. It was 4 parties, center-right parties, coalition, relatively homogeneous with strong will to do economic reforms. And we simply used this opportunity, this window of opportunity. But what was the most important, and you have mentioned this, was political will and political leadership. And this is in any country, this is the most important. At present, I'm repeating it every day in Ukraine. I'm saying leadership, ownership, and communication. Leadership means that you have politicians who have strong vision, will, and courage to do reforms. Ownership means that reforms are done not because pressure from IMF, from Troika, from European Union, but because because politician leaders are convinced that the reforms are necessary for my country, for my people, for their better future. And communication means that you have to use every possibility to communicate, to explain, to fight against populists, to fight against demagogues, against everybody who is against necessary changes and necessary reforms. And we simply did it. We simply used this opportunity, and very important role played my boss, Prime Minister Dzurinda, Mikloš Dzurinda, who really backed up all these reforms. I was kind of main architect of these reforms, but never happened that he said, look, don't do it because it's politically risky, we could lose. And it was difficult, of course. We were hated. We were the most unpopular government in the Slovakian history at that time. It was organized referendum for the firing the government. People were afraid because socialist opposition and also trade unions were feared people that we are crazy, we are now constructing wild capitalism of the 19th century and so on, which means it was very, very difficult, but that's the reason why I think the most important precondition, it will be difficult everywhere, in every country, simply because people, and this is normal, there's normal human behavior that people are afraid from the change. Because it is aversion to risk. It is normal everywhere, and that's the reason why, as I have mentioned in my speech, 25 years ago it was more technical than political problem, but now reforms are much more political problem than technical. We know what to do. We have both good and bad experiences, but political leadership is the key importance, and this was the main reason why in Slovakia it was possible to do at the time that we had this strong political leadership.
Politinė lyderystė yra be galo svarbus dalykas, bet politikoje dažniausiai taip nutinka, kad reformatoriai susidegina ant reformų laužo ir į valdžią ateina kontrreformatoriai. Tai Lietuvoje mes tą ypač ryškiai išgyvenom 1992 metų spalį 96 metais, kai valdžia sugrįžo komunistai ir, jeigu neklystu, pirmiausia sustabdė privatizavimo procesą ir apskritai sakė, kad visi tie, kurie čia buvo valdžioje, sugriovė kolchozus ir kitus gražius dalykus. Ir ko gero Bulgarija buvo nekartą kartojanti Lietuvos kelią, tai norėčiau kreiptis į poną Djankov. Ar dažnai pasitaikė Bulgarijoje, kad reformos būdavo atšaukiamos, revizuojamos, keičiama kryptis ir kokias neigiamas pasekmes tai atnešdavo ir kaip, ar įmanoma rasti kokį nors receptą, kad būtų galima išvengti reformų revizijos, ar įmanoma tai demokratiniai valstybei? Prašom.
Thank you. Yes, in fact, Bulgaria is one of the relatively few countries until very recently, when I think Hungary is going for the record, where reforms were not a straight upward sloping line, but there were significant reversals. And that was done, perhaps, as you mentioned here in Lithuania, by the former communist, now socialist party, which kept coming to power on 3 occasions in the last 25 years. In 97, then in 2005, and then actually for a brief period, 2013. But by then, we saw, I think, thankfully, that every time the duration of a former communist government was being shortened, so I think people were getting wiser. The last time was only about 10 months. But nevertheless, every one of these stays in government of the Socialist Party, some critical reforms were not just stopped, frozen, but were actually turned back, reversed. Examples with privatization and renationalization and privatization again of utilities, for example. Example of pension reform, that we essentially did the same reform three different times because of that. And that not only people commonly think, well, you lose a few years, so then you wait for more sensible government to come back, and then you implement back the reform that you had anyhow started. So that's what the common thinking is. But it's not that. To me, the most dangerous part of this is that people, politicians, populist politicians understand every reform can be reversed. So even when you do something, the people who are against you, the lobbyists, don't sort of quit and say, okay, we lost, let's go forward. But they immediately start thinking, which other constellation of politicians will go their way, and let's start immediately lobbying for the next time around. So enormous efforts in the political and lobbying field that are not just one-off against or for the reforms, but this continues. So a lot of wastage in the political spectrum. And I see this in maybe partly because of culture, as Lajos mentioned, but this happens a lot in Bulgaria, that happens a lot in Romania, where you see the same reform basically going back and forth. And since some of our neighboring countries like Romania have had a wild change in government, literally every year the same reform goes back and forth, and they become contestable. So I guess that's my point. Every reform becomes contestable. You don't know whether next year a crazier set of politicians will come and will reverse not just pension reform, social security, tax, and so on. So there is uncertainty, and once you have uncertainty, especially for business-related reforms, then that has a long-term negative effect on investment, something that I certainly would have not thought a few years back, advising on behalf of the World Bank various countries around the world. And I'll finish with this. In Bulgaria, at least, it was relatively clear. The split was socialists and progressives, liberals. But now we have examples where you start, like in Hungary, with the government now in power that started as a democratic government, let's say, I don't know how to call it. And then you see a period of a political process where the same government actually over time and over its terms in power reverts itself and actually starts supporting issues that perhaps they would have not supported at the beginning. At least this is how you see it from outside. Which then worries me the most, because it means maybe 10 years from now you would not know who you're fighting. Now we are fighting socialists, former communists. 10 years from now we may be fighting people who call themselves liberals, but are not liberal in nature. Thank you.
Dėkui ponui Djankovui. Noriu kreiptis į Lajos Bokros. Kokį jūs duotumėt patarimą politikui, kuris norėtų priimti nepopuliarų, bet reikalingą sprendimą? Ir dažniausiai jo patarėjai, ypač tie, kurie dirba su rinkėjais, visada stabdo. Koks yra pagrindinis dalykas pradedant reformą? ką turi žinot politikas, kad reforma pavyktų?
Thank you very much. This is the £1 billion question. 1 billion euro. Okay, let's agree on that. Part of the answer has been forthcoming from Ivan. Leadership, ownership, and communication. Let me just add a few more things. Maybe less important, but still important. I think credibility of the person is key. As Simeon was alluding to that, there are many chameleons in the zoo who have this view on Monday and an opposing view on Tuesday. Sooner rather than later, the general public will realize who is trustworthy and who is not. Credibility comes with competence, with professional competence. It's not just that you are a good politician, but you understand what the hell you are talking about. And last but not least, I think in our part of the world, in every country, including the very successful ones, we still have a huge problem, which is corruption. Credibility can be destroyed overnight if the general public realizes that you speak one way and you behave in another way. I established a new political party in Hungary 2 years ago. I was not a politician per se when I was Minister of Finance 20 years ago. I was considering myself more of a technocrat, and then I spent 8 years working for financial imperialism at the World Bank and IMF. But then I realized it's not enough, especially in times when populism is coming back so strongly. And not only populism, even fascism, even extreme right or extreme left populist ideology, which we have to fight tooth and nail because it can engulf the whole nation and destroy the national psyche. The name of my party is Movement for a Modern Hungary, and I put an emphasis on modern. Modern means at least two things: market economy and liberal democracy. These two things are constantly being questioned right now, not only in Central and Eastern Europe, but also in Western Europe, in many, many countries. So we are back to basics. It's no longer about left and right. It's more about normal, modern thinking versus populism. And I think it's important for people to realize that if Europe as a whole, even the European Union as a political project, wants to survive in a more and more globalizing and globalized world, then we have to be more modern and less populist. And that is exactly what we are fighting for. It's a question of values, it's a question of conviction, it's a question of ideology, it's a question of openness, it's a question of rule of law, it's a question of credibility, including you do not have to become rich when you are in politics.
Ačiū daktarui Bokrošui. Ir per likusį laiką norėčiau, kad kiekvienas iš mūsų diskusijos dalyvių atsakytų į tokį klausimą: o ar įmanoma apskritai toliau reformuoti socialinės gerovės valstybę, europinę valstybę. Todėl, kad tai, ką mes čia šnekam, kartais gali pasirodyti kaip pokalbis abiturientų susitikime po 25 metų. Mes kažką padarėm, kažko nepadarėm, bet mes dabar gyvenam Europos Sąjungai ir esame, nori kas to ar nenori, europiečiai, visi jau 11 metų Europos Sąjungoje. Ar įmanoma reformuoti Europos valstybę? Klausiu, žiūrėdamas į Graikijos pavyzdį, kur tuo metu, kai žmonėms sakoma, jog reikia daryti tą ir tą, jie sako, duokit mums pinigų čia ir dabar, ir į valdžią ateina tokios jėgos, kurios, nenori kalbėti ekonominiais terminais, ir panašiai gali vykti ir Ispanijoje. Tai ar gali vykti taip, kaip sakė Aleksandras Abišala, 80% reformos padarei, daryk naują? Gal nuo Aleksandro ir pradėkim.
Aš manau, kad aš išgirdau du klausimus. Ar reikia reformuoti Europos Sąjungą ir reikia reformuoti konkrečią valstybę ar nežinau, teritoriją, kas ten bus likę, jeigu labai stipriai sureformuosime Europos Sąjungą link federalizmo. Atsakymas be jokios abejonės. Be jokios abejonės, jau vien dėl to, kad tik tai darant pokyčius gali atsirasti progresas. Kas tau atrodė prieš 3, 5 ar 10 metų galutinis pasiekimas, po to jau nebeveikia, nefunkcionuoja kaip institucija. Bet antra vertus, vien palaikyti žmonių dinamikai, žmonių judrumui, žmonių tikėjimui, kad gali būti dar kas nors, ko dabar nėra, be jokios abejonės reikia reformuotis. Na, o Lietuvoje mes visi skalambijam daug metų irgi, ką vis dar reikia reformuoti ir ką aš sakyčiau nebuvo reformuota dėl to, kad tam tikras institucijas paveldėjome iš Sovietų Sąjungos. Tai žinoma, visų pirma švietimas. Daug kas gali ginčytis, kad reforma pati pirmoji, beveik švietimo reforma apskritai tarp politinių sistemų, tautinė mokykla, kuri keitė sovietinę sistemą, bet po to buvo tokie pasistumdymai ir Nerija gali pritarti ar nepritarti, bet tikros reformos, išlaisvinančios žmogų, leidžiančios jam išmokti mokytis, išmokti prisimti atsakomybės, paruošti į gyvenimui, o ne išmokyti labai konkretaus dalyko, vis dar nėra. Nei darželyje, nei vidurinėje mokykloje, nei universitete. Mes drįsčiau sakyti, nežiūrinti daugybę reformų planų ir pavadinimų, nesam reformavę sveikatos apsaugos sistemos. Mes bandom reformuoti gydymo sistemą, atkreipkite dėmesį, bet apie sveikatos apsaugą tik toks vardas ministerijos, bet kalbos ir reformos nėra. Mes esam padarę tam tikrų žingsnių socialinėje apsaugoje, bet čia jau kolegos šnekėjo, vis grįžtam atgal. Ir be abejo, tai, ką dabar šnekam, ir aš vakariai sukalbu maldelę, gal pasiseks, reiškia darbo kodekso reforma, darbo santykių reforma. Vat jums 4 dalykai, be kurių šnekėti ne apie pigios darbo jėgos pranašumus, o apie iš tikrųjų konkurencingą valstybę mes negalim.
Ta patį klausimą užduodu Ivan Mikloš. Ar įmanomos reformos socialinės gerovės valstybėje, Europos valstybėje?
Yeah, this is of course very broad question and very complex problem. But I think firstly we have to accept, and this is reality, that global competitive pressure is growing, and to be competitive, only way is to do reforms, which means reforms are necessary process. This is not one-time action, but it is permanent process, which is necessary precondition for to be competitive. First point. Second point, Europe, of course, has problem that this very well-known figure, 7% of global inhabitants, 25% of global GDP, but 50% of global social expenditures. This is, of course, unsustainable. which means necessity of reforms, and as I think Lajos and Simeon also, they have mentioned, reforms based on the same principles, which means macroeconomic consolidation, including fiscal sustainability, and structural reforms based on liberalization, deregulation, privatization. Small but effective state are necessary everywhere, not only in transition countries, not only in the southern European countries like Greece and Spain. And even more urgent is the problem inside the Eurozone, as we can see in Greece, because problem of the Eurozone is not that there are different countries with different economic development, but problem of Eurozone is that there are countries with the competitive divergence, and this is the problem. If there are countries which have competitive divergence, which means they're increasing the difference between their competitiveness, then it is unsustainable. And you can solve this problem by two main measures or solutions. First one is transfer union, which means to give money from those who are more competitive to those who are less competitive. This is, fortunately, I have to say, impossible and unsustainable because it is no sufficient strong feeling of the common European unity. There is no legitimacy for this, and of course politically it's impossible, especially at these more competitive countries, to send money to this one. But it is also, second, the real solution, and the real solution is not transfer union, but reform union. Reform union means to increase competitiveness of those who are lagging behind by doing necessary reforms. And we have even very nice historical example. Transfer union was reunification of the Germany, and reform union was development in other Central European and Baltic countries, which increased their competitiveness by doing reforms, and then were able to join not only European Union, but also Eurozone. Which means only chance for Eurozone, of course, is to have rules which will push, but very strict and very enforceable rules, which will give only two alternatives for the Eurozone countries, either to do necessary reforms or to leave Eurozone. And unfortunately, we are missing this exit rule in the Eurozone, and this is one of the reasons why this never-ending story with Greece and other countries. Which is my short answer is yes, even because the situation, the reforms are more urgent in the European Union and Europe as maybe in other parts in the world.
Ačiū. Kokia jūsų nuomonė, ponia Simeon Djankov, šiuo klausimu?
My short answer is that the European Union can be truly a reform union only if it's, at least for a period of time, run by East Europeans. As long as Western Europeans and Southern Europeans run the European Union, it's never going to be reformed. For two reasons. First was already mentioned by the Prime Minister, is that in their mind the reform is something very, very glacial, slow-moving, and very, very trivial. So changing the tax bracket by 1 percentage point in a country like Italy or France is considered a major reform. In our countries, because of where we started, we're used to a lot more radical reforms, and our politicians, perhaps not all of them, but we do have politicians who are courageous enough to do significant reforms. This is largely missing in Western Europe and completely missing in Southern Europe. The specimen of a reformist politician just does not exist there. So that's the primary reason why I think that we need to take over the European Union for some time, reform it, and then we can leave it to others to enjoy the benefits. And the other smaller reason is just my own experience with the European Union. I was, together for Ivan for a period of time, finance minister exactly during the Eurozone crisis, and I could see how, you know, in 2009, 2010, 2011, another crisis is burning up, Ireland, Spain, Portugal, and so on. We would say how important it is to work hard and so on, by June, and then we say, but July and August we're not meeting because we're all on vacation, because this is the social way of Europeans doing things, and for 2 months we would actually not work, not meet, because this is how West Europeans and Southern Europeans view it. So in short, it's possible. Let's have some East European politicians run Europe for a while. Not the current Hungarian politicians, I hope.
Ir tas pats klausimas ponui Lajosui Bokros.
For the lack of time, I skipped the answer about how to reform the European Union, because that's an enormous subject, and at this point, once again, we have a political impediment. That is to say, there is no appetite in European public opinion to have more EU-level competencies, hence reforms. So reforms stay at the national level for a long time, and we cannot change that situation. Now, when it comes to reforming what we can say a premature welfare state in some of the Central and Eastern European countries, then the question is really how we look at the state. Is it necessarily an enemy of the market, or is it a necessary framework for the market? And the question is not only the size of the state, but for me, more importantly, the quality of the state. If the state is there to destroy competitiveness, implement punitive, distortionary taxes, chase away foreign investors, destroy the rule of law, destroying hence the market, then it's a bad state. If the state is there to destroy monopolies, to improve competition, to improve competitiveness, to help entrepreneurs to create a very, very user-friendly investment climate, to have a tax system which is equal for all, and it's a relatively clean state in the sense that corruption is kept at a manageable level, because we all know it cannot be eradicated completely, then it's a good state. So I think the quality of the state does matter a lot, not only the quantity of the state. And when we think about further structural reforms, then it is important to keep in mind that the quality of the state will enhance probably more the economic competitiveness than any transfer which can come from the European Union. Actually, the transfers which come from the European Union can be very disadvantageous in the sense that they lubricate the rusting edifice of a bad state. Hungary, again, is a very good example for that. We receive, on a net basis, more than 3.5% of GDP every year from the Western European taxpayer, on a net basis. And this amount is more, in absolute terms, than the whole government investment at every level. So without EU transfers, there will be no one single cent of public investment in Hungary. Which means that at the same time, when we have a government which is strongly and violently and aggressively anti-European, and it is cherishing itself as a fighting force against the domination of the European Union, it is supported by the Western European taxpayers. So it's perpetuating the existence of this government. Hence, it is distorting also the thinking of many entrepreneurs, because for the entrepreneurs, the important thing is not market success. The important thing is to be friend of the government, which is what we call crony capitalism. So I think we are back in square one, in a sense, Because many of these structural reforms, which we felt 20 years ago we implemented and we can forget about, we should start all over again. And we should start all over again in a situation whereby our Western European partners and friends, you're absolutely right, Simeon, do not understand that the same reforms are more important sometimes for them in order to enhance the collective competitiveness of the European Union and also to change the collective culture. Fortunately, some countries are better than the others. So I would not say that all Southern Europeans are equally bad in this respect. Spain has implemented, for example, quite a few important structural reforms, and we can see the consequences, the positive consequences. The growth rate of Spain this year is going to be 3.6% or even more, and it's sustainable, and it's an export-led growth. And many other positive things are happening, including Ireland as well. It's a good example, but that's not a Southern European country. So the picture is mixed, but it is important to mention again, I think, or emphasize, that what we need is good governance and good state, which can really preserve the most important incentives for a healthy market economy in order to provide growth and welfare, which cannot be provided just by a state if the economy is not functioning.
Ačiū Bokros ir vietoj apibendrinimo norėčiau pasakyti porą sakinių. Reformos visais atžvilgiais yra baisiai nepatogus dalykas. Bet yra toks banano principas. Jeigu tu nusipirkai neprinokusi bananą, tai reiškia, kad tu jį neprinokusi ir suvalgysi. Jeigu nusipirkai pernokusi bananą, tai reiškia, kad jo nesuvalgysi, nes jis bus supuvęs jau. Tai šiuo atveju turbūt paskutinis sakinys turėtų būti toks. Tie, kurie nesikeičia, tuos labai greit pakeičia. Ačiū už jūsų dėmesį, ačiū diskutantams Ivan Mikloš, Simeon Djankov, Lajos Bokros ir Aleksandrui Abišalai. Dėkoju už dėmesį, kavos pertrauka.
Kadangi truputį užvėlavome, tai 3:30 grįžkime atgal, gerai?